Why every country is in debt and who do they owe? Let me ask you something that almost no one ever questions. You hear it all the time. Countries are in debt, trillions of dollars. Headlines screaming about rising deficits, collapsing currencies, and governments borrowing more and more every year. But stop for a second. If every country is in debt, who exactly are they borrowing from? Because logically, someone has to be on the other side of that equation. And here's where things get uncomfortable. The deeper you go, the more you realize this isn't just about money, it's about how the entire global system actually works. Today, we're going to break it down in a way most people have never heard before. By the end of this, you'll understand why debt isn't just a problem, it's actually the foundation of the modern economy. And number 5, that's where everything flips. Before we dive into who countries owe money to, you need to understand something more important. Debt is not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's built into the system. Here's how it works. Governments spend money on infrastructure, salaries, defense, healthcare, all the things that keep a country running. But very rarely do they have enough tax revenue to cover all of it. So what do? They borrow. And they do it by issuing something called government bonds. Think of a bond as an IOU. The government says, lend us money today and we'll pay you back later with interest. Simple. But here's where it gets interesting. Because governments don't just borrow occasionally, they borrow constantly. In fact, most countries don't aim to eliminate debt, they aim to manage it. That's the first truth most people never realize. Now let's answer the big question. Who do countries actually owe money to? The first and biggest group is something called domestic investors. This includes banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and even ordinary citizens. Yes, in many cases, governments are borrowing from their own people. For example, when a pension fund invests in government bonds, it's essentially lending money to the government so it can later pay retirees. Banks do the same thing. They buy government debt because it's considered one of the safest investments available. So when you hear that a country is deep in debt, a large portion of that money is actually owed internally. It's not some external enemy. It's part of the country's own financial ecosystem. But that's only the beginning. The second group is foreign governments and international investors. Here's where things start to feel more global. Countries like China, Japan, and others hold massive amounts of foreign government debt, especially U.S. Treasury bonds. Why? Because these are stable, relatively safe assets. If you're a country with excess money, parking it in another country's bonds is a way to preserve wealth while earning interest. So yes, countries do owe money to other countries, but not in the way people imagine. It's not like one country is calling another saying, pay up or else. It's more like a massive web of financial relationships where everyone is both a borrower and a lender at the same time. Now let's take it one level deeper. The third and most misunderstood player in this system is the central bank. This is where things start to feel almost unreal. A central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the U.S. or the state bank in many countries, has the power to create money, not print it physically, create it digitally. When governments need to borrow large amounts, central banks can step in and buy government bonds, which means they are lending money that didn't exist before. Let that sink in. New money is created, used to buy government debt, and then injected into the economy. This process is often called monetizing the debt, and it's one of the main reasons modern economies don't collapse under their own debt levels, because the system can expand. But there's a trade-off. More money in the system can lead to inflation, and inflation, that's how the value of money slowly erodes over time. So while debt keeps the system running, it also creates long-term pressure. Now here's where most people get it completely wrong. They think debt is always bad, but in reality, not all debt is created equal. There's something called productive debt. This is when a government borrows money to invest in things that grow the economy, infrastructure, education, technology. If those investments generate more economic activity, the country can handle the debt. It's like taking a loan to start a business that earns more than the loan costs. Smart. But then there's unproductive debt. This is when money is borrowed just to cover expenses, salaries, subsidies, short-term political promises. No growth, no return, just more debt. And this is where countries start to struggle, because the debt keeps increasing, but the ability to repay it doesn't. Now here comes the part most people never see. What happens if a country can't repay its debt? Does someone come and take over? Not exactly. In most cases, countries don't pay off their debt in the way individuals do. They roll it over, which means they take new loans to pay off old ones. And as long as investors believe the country is stable, this cycle continues. But if that trust breaks, that's when things get serious. Currencies can collapse, inflation can spiral, and the cost of borrowing skyrockets. We've seen this happen in multiple countries throughout history, and it always follows the same pattern: too much debt, too little growth, loss of confidence. Now let's connect all of this back to you, because this isn't just some abstract economic concept. It affects your life more than you think. When governments take on more debt, they often need to manage it through three main tools: higher taxes, more borrowing, or inflation. And guess who feels the impact of all three? You do. Higher taxes reduce your income, more borrowing increases future pressure, and inflation quietly reduces the value of your money. That's why understanding this system isn't just interesting, it's essential.
Because once you see how it works, you start thinking differently about money. You stop assuming that safe means sitting still. You start realizing that the system itself is constantly moving, expanding, shifting, adjusting. And if you're not moving with it, you're falling behind. Now, let's bring it all together. Every country is in debt, not because they're failing, but because that's how the modern financial system is designed to function. They borrow to grow. They issue bonds to raise capital. They rely on investors, institutions, and central banks to keep the system flowing. And in many cases, they owe money to themselves just as much as to others. It's not a simple story of winners and losers. It's a complex, interconnected network where everyone is part of the same game. But here's the real takeaway. The system isn't built to eliminate debt. It's built to sustain it. And once you understand that, you stop asking, why is there so much debt? And start asking, how do I position myself in a system that runs on it? Because the people who understand this don't panic when they hear about rising debt. They prepare, they adapt, they make sure their money isn't sitting still while the system moves forward. So the next time you hear that a country owes trillions of dollars, don't just hear the number, understand the structure behind it. Because once you see how the system actually works, you'll never look at money the same way again. If this opened your eyes even a little, hit that like button. It helps more than you think. And if you want me to break down how this system directly impacts your personal wealth, drop a comment below. I'll see you in the next one.